क्लास में करना है ना, एक तो हमें ये बोर्ड चेंज करना पड़ेगा, नंबर 1, ठीक है। एक उनको बोलो आर्ट्स फैकल्टी में कौन है यहाँ, थ्री। Okay, students, we will start demand, supply, these concepts today. Okay, basically last class what I told you, do you remember? We started with basic concepts, yeah, in economics like positive and normative economics and definitions, all these things we told. Now, in this particular class, I will talk about how consumers behave, because in my last class again I told you about the economic agents of the society. Consumer is one of them, producer is one of the agents, economic agents. So talk about consumer, talk about producer. Producer is also, you can call the producer a seller of a product. The consumer is a buyer, like that. So these are economic agents. How they behave in the market. Our question is how these agents behave in the market. Behavior of these people. Behavior of these agents. In this case, you have all come across the concept of demand. You see, let us start with how a buyer or a consumer behaves. While trying to understand the decisions taken by consumer as regards to purchase of a commodity in the market, there are certain things that goes in the mind of the consumer, that what is the preference, what the consumer actually, what is the particular consumer, what the consumer wants first, and in that way the consumer will also look at the price of the product, the affordability, whether he has or she has the income available. But before that, let me also tell you that if the consumer wants everything in the market, can he or she purchase? No. So here comes the question of demand, because a market where a seller is there to sell can only give the product to a buyer in return of price. Okay. While doing so, the buyer looks at, if the price is very high and beyond, say, his or her reach, he will not purchase. If the price is low, then naturally. So this particular behavior of price and quantity, I mean this particular relationship of price and quantity, is basically what is popularly known as the demand. So we must know what is demand and how it is defined, and what is the what are the factors that affect demand. All these things you have all studied in your 12th class, but it will be a revision of those things. So a consumer's demand is typically, a consumer's demand is definitely different than what the consumer desires. Okay, so while desiring for a particular product, the market is not there to just fulfill the desire of a consumer. The market is there to fulfill the demand. If the demand means if the consumer has income, adequate income and budget in his or her pocket, then fine. So the first thing that demand is influenced by is income of the consumer and price of the product. These two are very important factors. Okay. Then taste and preference of the consumer. Taste whether the consumer likes or not, because there are varieties of product available. So one of the product is perhaps most important for the consumer. Then availability of substitutes. Of course, how many products are there? These are called related goods, either complementary goods or substitute goods. These are also important because price of substitute goods are important there. If one of the, suppose between two soft drinks, if you find both are same, yeah, both can satisfy the want of the consumer, then the consumer will go for that particular product which is relatively cheaper. So these four important factors are there which which influence the demand of the consumer while the consumer goes to the market. That is about individual demand. I am one individual in the market as a but from the point of view of the product, that particular product or a good is consumed by so many consumers. There we talk about market demand of the good. So from individual demand to market demand, these are two important concept in demand. That how market demand is derived? Market demand is derived when you add all the quantities at that given price, those quantities which are consumed by the consumers in the market. So total consumers who are there in the market, they constitute the total population in terms of purchase of that particular product. So those total consumers constitute the whole market for that particular good. Okay. So while deriving the market demand, you have to see that if consumer 1 purchases 10 units, consumer 2 purchases say 20 units. So if there are two consumers, then total is 30 units at the prevailing price which is sold in the market. So market demand curve is given the price, the total quantity sold of the product. Okay. One very important concept again is attached to demand, and that is called elasticity. Okay. What is this? This concept is borrowed from physics. So elasticity talks about if price changes, because naturally in a real world situation, price is not constant. Price can vary from time to time. Price of the same product can vary from time to time. So if the price is changing, then how the consumers are behaving, whether they are increasing or decreasing there. So it has been seen that, and the degree also is important, degree of change. Okay. So in certain cases, if you say look at the goods in the market, the nature of goods, if you study them, you find there are certain goods which are necessary goods. Yeah, necessary means you want these goods always, and normally with the change in price or income, the demand for them will not change much. That is why they are necessary. Say food item, a basic food item is a necessary good, we want it at any cost. Similarly, there are certain goods which are called luxury goods. If your income increases, then you will go for them. Okay, status goods. So like diamond, say gold, these are status symbol, and they go with, fashionable goods. So often they are called snob goods. So because people will, those persons who are very rich, they want to say show off, then these are the goods available. So depending on the nature of goods in the market and the change in their prices or change in the income of the consumer, the demand or quantity demanded will be decided accordingly. So that is the reason why elasticity is important. In case of necessary goods, even if the price is changing, you don't find much change or no change in the quantity. So in that case, the demand is said to be perfectly inelastic. There is no elasticity, there is no change. So elasticity is basically if we apply force on a particular object and there is a change in the position or situation, then we call there is elasticity. Similarly here, the force is price. If the price is changing, The quantity is, if the quantity is changing, then there is elasticity. How much is changing? Then the degree of elasticity. That how much is important, measurement of how much change has taken place. Why this study is important? Because after all, the market has to supply and according to the demand. Okay, so the change in demand that is taking place in the market with respect to particular good, the next, I mean, after a particular time, the market has to supply after a change in price. So how much to supply will depend on what is the elasticity factor that is there. Otherwise, surplus or shortage will take place if the estimation is not proper. Okay, and price will be again affected. So market will not clear. So the estimation of elasticity or is very important that way. So goods which are necessary, this has been observed that necessary goods, they do not have elasticity in terms of demand. So demand inelastic. These are perfectly inelastic goods. Goods which are normal goods, which we consume on everyday life, they are elastic, because if a price is say falling, then according to the law of demand, as I said, quantity will increase. How much will increase again is the question. So that we can measure or calculate by using the formula for elasticity. Okay, so normal goods, necessary goods, or there are luxury goods. You can easily find out the elasticity factor by using a formula, that is the percentage change in quantity to ratio of percentage change in quantity to percentage change in price. Okay, so you can easily calculate. And normally, because demand and price and quantity relationship on a demand curve is negative, so you find for normal goods elasticity is having a negative sign, but we normally ignore that. But so inverse relationship between price and quantity is given by this negative sign. So elasticity is important from this point of view. What is the, I mean, influence of income here, or how income is important in knowing the elasticity? You find that certain goods, as I said, necessities or say inferior goods, a consumer normally, if a consumer is getting richer day by day, that means the income is increasing, the consumer will not purchase those inferior goods. So with increase in income, inferior goods means even necessities are inferior also at times. But the question is, there are certain necessities, say for example bread, which is very necessary good, but it has been observed, there was a special case which is known as Giffen's paradox. A person, an economist called Giffen, who invented this during war period in Britain, that people during war period are consuming bread even if the price of bread is very high. More bread during, because bread is necessary, and during war period there is shortage. So people want necessary goods because other goods are not available. Fine. And even if the price is high, they have to survive. So they divert their income accordingly. Okay. So the question is, this is called Giffen's paradox, a special kind of inferior good which defies the law of demand. So income is associated with actually knowing the nature of the good. If income is increasing and you are not consuming that particular good, it means it must be an inferior good. So that is the reason why we have to see income elasticity that way. So how quantity demanded is affected due to change in income. So the question is, similarly, another concept of elasticity along with price elasticity, income elasticity, another concept of elasticity is cross elasticity. As I said, there are three important factors besides taste and preference. related goods, income and price. So, change in price affects change in quantity. There you measure price elasticity, the degree, how much is changing. Change in income, the quantity is changing. There you find income elasticity, that how much quantity is changing due to change in income. Now the third one is, if there is a substitute good available and you are purchasing a substitute good, then you will definitely look at the price of your substitute good and accordingly demand. So, there we calculate cross elasticity, either it is a substitute or a complement, how the price of a substitute is affecting the quantity demanded of the good that is in question. So, you take examples of many, we commonly give complement goods are say tea and sugar, they mostly consumed together. So, your consumption of tea may be affected by the price of sugar. Okay, if price of sugar is very high, maybe you are consuming very less quantity of tea. So, how much is that less is known, will be calculated or estimated by the cross elasticity. So, why cross? Because there are two goods involved. So, cross elasticity. So, these are important while trying to understand consumers behavior, because consumers behavior is you can study by looking at or estimating the demand of the consumer, the market demand of the good. Okay. If we take one example of any good, you see, you can estimate its market demand by looking at the total quantity sold, which is again a function of the total number of consumers prevalent, I mean they are in the market, income of the consumers taken together, we call say GDP of the country. If GDP is increasing, expenditure on goods and services must be increasing. That is how. So, income of the society or national income for that matter is also another important factor while calculating or estimating the market demand. Okay. Besides these three factors or four factors which are affecting individual demand: income, price, related goods and taste and preferences. Okay. Coming to the producer's side, seller's side. Seller will supply a good if prices are increasing, because the seller wants profit in the market. Why after all the seller will sell? So, quantity supplied by a seller is depending on whether price is increasing or not. Okay. So, normally the supply curve that you have popularly studied in your 12th class is upward sloping if we plot quantity and price, just the opposite of the demand curve. A consumer will always want to purchase more if the prices are falling, and a seller will always sell more if the prices are increasing. Okay. So, again, how much quantity will be changing, either increasing or decreasing, if price is changing, that will be known by elasticity of supply. So, a typical demand curve, quantity, price, the demand for a good, say X, which you have already studied in your. These are elementary and as I said now, in case of supply, a typical supply curve of the good, if price is increasing, then supply curve shows upward moving. So, price is 5, say quantity is 10 and price is increasing to say 10, quantity is say 25, like that. In this case, if price falls from 10, the quantity will increase from say 5 to say 20, like that. if we talk about the degree of change in demand and the concept of elasticity, let me write down the formulas. Demand elasticities. What are they? Say price, or straightway I will write like this. Price elasticity of demand. Normally we denote it, okay, small case e, the subscript d for demand. So in a typical way, if I can write these are delta q by delta p. Q is quantity, p is price, so p by q. This is generally the formula. If there is a continuous change, we can use the symbol d. Okay, this is discrete change, large changes, and say like dq by dp into p by q in case of a continuous change. The same thing, negative for demand, positive for supply. Price elasticity of demand, if we and price elasticity of supply, I can use both demand and supply. So if the value is negative, this means the demand side. If the value is positive, it's for supply side. So when I come to various elasticities, so you can draw the demand curve like this. Suppose a vertical demand curve means with change in price, there is no change in quantity. So perfectly inelastic demand that you have studied in your 12th class. I can jolly well in one diagram show you all these things. No need to say a horizontal demand curve shows perfectly elastic demand. A vertical demand curve will show perfectly inelastic demand. In this case, there is no change in price, but quantities can change. And in this case, there is change in price, but no change in quantity. Okay. So, and second, now, if the changes are uniform, say a rectangular hyperbola kind of demand, then elasticity of demand will be okay. Rectangular hyperbola means the area, if the like this, if this is the thing and there is a change, so these areas are all equal. That is why, okay, the change in price, change in quantity, the area coming out, generated out of that is always equal. So this is the thing. Now you see this elasticity is also, when you calculate it, they are related to slope of the demand curve. Okay, so here the slope of the demand curve is the maximum, so elasticity is the minimum. So given price and quantity, elasticity is related to slope, inversely related. Okay, given price and quantity. So if P and Q are constant, these two are constant, then dq by dp is inverse of, so you can write what is dq by dp here is 1 upon dp by dq, and this is the slope of the demand curve. Okay, so if the slope of the demand curve is infinite, say vertical, so automatically 1 by infinity is 0, so none. Similarly, in this case, this is the slope is nothing, so 1 by 0 is infinity, so that is up. And in this case, this is 1, So because again you find the slope is similarly closer to infinity. If the slope is close to infinity, so take a very steeper line, very steep line. So this will be less than 1. Similarly, anything that is close to horizontal, say a flatter curve, the slope is normally very less. So elasticity will be more than 1. So that is how price elasticity. Coming to demand side. Coming to supply, you can also see that how supply curve can change shape of the supply curve as per elasticity. Apply the same formula, then you find that a supply curve through the origin, whatever is the slope, but a supply curve through the origin will have elasticity equal to 1. Why? You can easily prove it, because through the origin P by Q and del Q by del P, they are always equal. Okay, yeah, uniform through the slope. So supply curve here will have elasticity of supply 1. Fine. If the supply curve originates from say price axis like this, so that means the it cuts the price axis. And another thing, supply curve cutting the quantity axis. What will have? What will be the impact on elasticity? This is elasticity greater than 1, and this is elasticity less than 1. Okay. Why? Can you prove it? Again, through this slope. I think all of you can prove it easily. Use the same formula. Okay. And of course, a perfectly elastic supply and perfectly inelastic supply. The same vertical lines and horizontal lines. So producer's behavior, and so producer behavior is known by the supply side of the market, where you see that the producer produces and sells at higher prices, more quantities. And again, elasticity is important, because that is how the producer can estimate, depending on the quantity, how the quantity is responding, change in quantity is responding to change in price. So accordingly, the producer will take decision about next round sales. When I call income elasticity, so similarly I can give a name like say M for that, and similarly change in income. So let us say income is Y, so like this. If this value is 0, this means the good is a kind of necessary good. So depending on this, if this is 0, implies necessity. If this is greater than 1, if this is less than 1, if this is negative. This is important. If this is negative, then it must be inferior good. If this is greater than 1, it must be a luxury one. If this is less than 1, but also false, I mean 0 on one side, that means greater than 0, it must be a normal good. So normal, we luxury and inferior. Hence, after again coming to cross elasticity, call it say C, say change in quantity of X due to change in price of say Z. If X and Z are two goods, then by so cross. So if we find this is greater than 0, if the value is say less than 0, if less than 0 negative, so these must be complementary good because goods are taken together. So this is complementary good and this must be substitute good. So this is how we know the nature of the good, how they are related through elasticity. And you know, elasticity itself is also affected by certain factors. What are they? Say coming to demand, elasticity of demand. It depends on, if suppose as a consumer, uh, my purchases of a particular good is going very high, I mean increasing very high, if the price is say falling by a small amount, then what are the considerations I am making and why it is happening with me? It may not happen with you. Or from the in the market, if the good is actually behaving that way, or all consumers are purchasing that way, so the good is said to be highly elastic. So what are the factors that make people purchase that good? What could be the thing? Hmm. Any other thing? Quality. Not okay, but need is there. That is why the consumer is going to the market. Hmm? You see, certain factors have already been observed. Their impact has been observed. One of them is say availability of substitutes in the market. If a good is having more substitutes, okay, then you find that a price change will trigger large changes in quantity. Okay, you can always read those factors 1, 2, 3. There are 4, 5 factors there. One of them is availability of substitutes. Second one, this income standard, level of income of the consumer. Okay, because consumer has a rich consumer, for example, it doesn't matter for a very rich consumer what is the price of the product, but for a poor it may matter. So the change will take place accordingly, and composition of this in the market of such consumers ultimately will decide how much the good will, how much quantity of the good will change. Okay. On the supply side, if I ask you, what are the factors that determine supply? Tell me some of them. Hmm? Cost of raw material, not raw material. You must say cost or price the supplier is paying to get those raw materials, because These are intermediate products, raw materials. It will be used again for to produce the final product. So that constitute the cost of production. Technology available, price of the product itself, price of other goods which are close substitute of the good that is the supplier is producing. So from the individual supplier side, these things matter to supply a good. And accordingly, the elasticity of supply also is there. I mean, will be affected. So the producer and consumer taken together constitute the market, and we find a simple demand and supply interacting to determine the market equilibrium price of the market. So this is equilibrium price, equilibrium quantity, and the market clears at this point. The demand is equal to supply. We say the market clears. Market for a good, a single good. For any, I mean, you just see that so many goods are available, but market for, if you want to study market for a single good, this is how we get the picture. Okay, and this is a equilibrium point. What is equilibrium? Last time I talked about equilibrium. It's a very important concept in economics. A position from where, if you deviate, then the new position will be inferior to the original one. That is why it is equilibrium. You deviate upwards, the price is high, the supply is more than demand, so there is excess supply. This will automatically reduce the price, because in order to sell the product, the seller must reduce the price. Similarly, if the price falls, or I mean price is below the equilibrium price, there is excess demand, where demand quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied, so price will automatically increase. So that is why it's a stable equilibrium. Stable equilibrium happens because the demand is downward sloping, the supply is upward sloping. This is also a condition. Think of a downward sloping supply and a downward sloping demand. The price, equilibrium price will not be stable. It will always fluctuate. Okay. So why? Because in this case there is excess demand. In excess demand, price must increase. Here there is, excess supply. At this point there is excess supply, price must fall, excess demand, price must increase. But if we look at the quantity supplied and quantity demanded, there will be a difference. There are certain, I mean, equilibrium price cannot be also established if the market is not viable. Viable means at least the supplier must get price above its minimum cost of production. Otherwise, the market cannot be created. The good will not be produced. Okay. So, this is a viable market. What does that mean? This market gives the market for a good. This is the minimum supply price. This is the equilibrium price. So, market can be established because the seller can sell the product at this price, say P naught, but getting a price which is P bar. So, the minimum supply price and the actual price, the difference is positive, actual price is more than the minimum. So, this is called what is popularly known as producer's surplus in the market. For a consumer, the height of the demand curve gives you the consumer's willingness to pay for the product rather than not purchasing it at all. So, if the consumer is ready to pay P dash but actually paying P bar, then this is a typical, this area is called consumer's surplus. This is producer surplus, this is consumer surplus. So, this is the total surplus in the market which is distributed between consumer and seller. So, that is how we call that such a market is now giving benefit to both consumer and seller. Consumer is consuming the product and getting satisfaction through this consumer surplus, and the producer is selling the product and getting profit through this producer surplus. So this is the short side of the market. Okay, and this whole surplus is nothing but the total social welfare in terms of, say, if we try to estimate it, the area, then we get the total welfare of, so, of the society, which is achieved through production of this good and selling of this good in the market. So consumer and producer both are happy. Such a market is basically have to be competitive in nature. If it is a single good market, many sellers must be selling it. So that is how we are reaching to this point. Okay, and as I said, there is no surplus quantity, no deficiency in quantity. So market is clearing. Such type of market is desirable actually. In real world, we don't see. We will discuss it later on. Why the market may fail if the competitive nature of the market is not there. That we will study after this. But as I started with a single good case, how a consumer behaves, a producer through supply and demand, all these things. And this is how a simple market looks like. So if such a market can be established, both consumer and producer will be, at the end of the day, happy after transaction. Okay, end of the day, the consumer wants that. Okay, the consumer should be satisfied both in terms of paying the money and getting satisfaction. The producer gets the money and gets the satisfaction. So exchanges take place. Otherwise, there is no point in exchanging if both are not happy. Okay, so market as an institution is important for distribution of goods and services, and this is how through price this can be done, and the actual quantity to be produced. Okay, we don't want any surplus or deficit also, or shortage of the good. I think we must stop here. Okay, since we have limited number of classes, tell that, ask that boy, where is he?